So hi there, and welcome to Accessing Your Treasure Trove Within. And I want to thank you for coming. I'm Ian Bly, Optimize Results, personal trainer for your mind. And I'm here for two basic reasons. First is to plant a seed of transformation into your life some way, whether we ever see each other again or not. And secondly, to talk about my services, which I'll do towards the end. Now that word transformation gets used a lot in different ways with many different meanings. I actually have a friend who feels that every time they realize something, they've gone through a complete transformation. I have a slightly different idea in my mind, and this really works out for almost anything. I mean, if we have you all think of a dog, three-letter noun, big deal, right? Everybody pictures a different dog. So a word like transformation, you can be sure there's going to be a lot of different ways of looking at it. So let's sort of start out with a simple definition we can all share together. And that's going to be that transformation is a thorough metamorphosis in form. And my favorite example, maybe cliche, but I love it, is the good old caterpillar transformation into a butterfly. It's the same animal, it's the same DNA. And now instead of just being a leaf-eating crawler, it can slough off what wasn't serving its higher purpose, spread its wings, and fly. And this doesn't happen overnight, but of course we can plant the seed. To better illustrate, I'll start with a little story of a caterpillar named Ian. So I was always a very, very physical guy. I was into track, gymnastics, football, bikes, rock climbing, you name it. And I was pretty fast. I had a nickname in high school was the Flash. And I was also extremely curious about almost everything. Like Leonardo da Vinci was a major influence on me. So I studied art, and music, and philosophy, and psychology, and history, and science, and anthropology, and engineering, and more. Just devouring it all, looking for how the puzzle pieces fit together. And one of my favorite puzzle pieces was human nature. From childhood, I was always trying to figure out what makes people tick. I was just fascinated by how we seem to get in our own way without realizing. And so I started designing models of consciousness to better understand it. I continued designing these models right up through college, where I took art, philosophy, and science courses to deepen my understanding. To combine everything into something practical, I wove it into a design engineering degree. See, the philosophy got me deeper into linguistics, and I saw how engineers and artists seem to speak completely different languages. They didn't like each other too much. I thought, hey, I could be a go-between. I could be like a translator. So I started focusing my coursework on that. At this time, I was working my way through school. I was paying my way through it, doing re-engineering. And I continued after graduation. But for anyone who's not familiar with process re-engineering, it's really just what it sounds like. You look at a process of how something is being done, and you re-engineer it for increased effectiveness and efficiency. A great example of this was while I was in school, I was working at Bank of America, another bank. And this is a long time ago, back when they were major California bank. They had not merged with Nations Bank back east. And the word came down that they were going to let go of about 15 people. There were senior clerical staff to save something like $500,000. I went to talk to the vice president. I said, hey, if you give me like a couple of weeks, I can find a way to save even more, and we won't necessarily have to fire anybody. So it's like, go for it, go for it. To make an 8-year story very short, I saved them $47.5 million by re-engineering how they did what they did, right on down to, rather than sending something through interbranch mail to somebody, move their office right next door and say, hey, here. It speeds things up a lot. That kind of silliness, like putting accounts payable and accounts receivable on the same floor so they can communicate with one another. Those kinds of things that people just don't think about. So I realized, once again, it's always the human mind that gets in the way of doing things smoothly and efficiently, because it was just being done the way it had always been done. Lots of changes had happened, but they kept doing things the same way. So untangling those knots was my stock and trade. And doing it with people, I called it personal reengineering. Because back then, coaching really wasn't a thing outside of athletic coaching. Put it in normal terms, Tony Robbins hadn't even done his first Guthy-Renker late night infomercial yet. This is a long time ago. So I did this form of reengineering for about 15 years when life threw me a curveball. April of 1994, I was driving to a sales call for a company I was working with. And while waiting for the oncoming traffic to pass so that I could make a left turn, my little Honda was rear-ended by a big Viking freight truck. It hit so hard, it utterly squished my Accord into an accordion. The seat broke loose and my lower spine got hammered into my pelvis, splattering all my discs. I spent the next 3 years going through every mode of healing you can imagine, but the x-rays always looked the same. By 1997, I was starting to experience paralysis. Like my feet just did not listen to my brain. I could think, up on your toes, nothing happened. Wiggle your toes, nothing happened. So when I was out of all my options, I went through 19 surgical procedures to get me standing and wiggling my toes again. The doctors said they did everything they could, but I only had maybe 10 years and the paralysis was going to overcome and I was going to be in a wheelchair. So much for being the Flash. So there I was, already spiraling into depression from having my life ripped out from under me. And now I didn't even know who I was anymore. My identity had always been so wrapped up in my athleticism. Without that, who was I? I felt like I no longer had anything to offer. I was useless. I was pointless. And I wasn't seeing really much reason to struggle to stay alive. I went about as far down that dark path as a person could go, even contemplating taking myself off the game board completely at one point. So there I was, this great coach who'd helped so many people and organizations to thrive, and I couldn't pull myself out of the darkness. One day, while meditating, I heard the doctor's voice saying, "We've done all we can do." And somehow the "we" just jumped out at me. Nobody said I had done all I could do. And this started a whole new chain of thinking. Could I beat the doctor's prognosis? I started to see that I'd used my physical identity as a safe outer shell, armor, if you will, protecting my vulnerable heart. Now that was gone. Could I redefine myself? Could I discover my true identity beneath the stories I told myself all my life? And how would I do that? So I dove way seriously into yoga, qigong, tai chi, back into my studies of philosophy, psychology, neuroscience, and biology to rebuild my body, integrating with my mind and my spirit. I read everything I could on mind-body connections and healing, from Norman Cousins to Carolyn Mace. And along with rebuilding myself, I set about rebuilding and re-engineering the models of consciousness I'd been using in consulting and coaching. From the Enneagram to spiral dynamics to integral consciousness, from the intro to that old TV show, The $6 Million Man, I heard that voice. We can rebuild him better, stronger than he was before. And I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. The rebuild has to start in my mind, as the future vision is where it all begins. I continued honing and perfecting my models and systems until I developed a way to work with my own psyche as if it was an operating system with running programs. If there were issues or challenges, we could basically debug the code of our cerebral software and then create and insert new code that serves us better using principles of neuroplasticity. One of the most exciting discoveries along the way was the multiple perspective lenses cohabiting in my mind. I set about figuring out how to identify and get to know each of these lenses, each of these internal versions of ourselves that live inside. See, we all have this kind of multiple personality disorder and don't realize it, because it's like icebergs. Only the tips are showing in our consciousness, and the majority is way below the surface in our subconscious. Really easy way to see how this many of these voices is how when we have one of those arguments with ourselves and we decide on something, it's still not really decided. There's those little nagging other voices still trying to chime in and put their views out there. So there are these multiple views that agree and conflict, and we usually end up with some kind of compromise. Again, the voices arguing in the distance. It's a kind of chaotic noise that doesn't really serve us. And I thought, what if we could turn that cranial chaos into a quieter? What if we could get to know these internal versions of ourselves so well that we could use them like teams or boards of directors? Wouldn't that be more powerful than trying to copy some famous person who has a completely different life and mind from you? That old fake it till you make it stuff never works because you're faking it rather than learning how to make it. And then we beat ourselves up because it fails. And of course, brings along the good old imposter syndrome. So, got to give yourself a break. The game is rigged, and you'll never outdo somebody else at being them. And you at your best will be far more successful than any version of somebody else you're trying to be. See, your own style can be very different than a stereotype of a successful quote unquote person. And the difference is exactly what can take you to real success. You have both vices and virtues that make up your perspectives and how you see and function in the world. These perspectives have those treasure troves filled with tools. The secret is uncovering them, identifying them, and using them rather than leaving them hidden while chasing someone else's path. As the brilliant Joseph Campbell once said, if the path before you is clear, it's probably someone else's path. With all the tools within you, you'll be able to blaze your own path. It's just about you knowing that you have more to work with than you may realize yet. Behind that mask that we put on, the game face protecting ourselves from feeling vulnerable, is the person who has real dreams, hopes, fears, aspirations. That's an exciting person worth paying attention to. So put aside everything you've been told about not being who you need to be. You're exactly who you need to be. And the only thing potentially holding you back is not knowing what your resources are, maybe just how to access them yet. When I was contemplating my life in a wheelchair, there was at least one very powerful, angry voice that said, no freaking way. I'm not going to be in a chair. No. And sure, I've been able to hide behind my physicality, athleticism all my life, but now that was gone. Now I was going to be forced to be who I really am, the guy inside that body, the consciousness, my values, my dreams. So going inside of ourselves, we find that we all have certain innate skills that are born of how we see the world. And when we match them to our tasks, we have many more resources to use. Our perspectives are what offer you these resources. So obviously, more perspectives equals more resources. Let's look at a couple of very common lens perspectives and how they each offer innate abilities that we can use. Let's say you find that you're somewhat obsessive about things being done right. Does this go along with a sense of ethical righteousness that irks you when others don't pull their weight? This worldview goes hand in hand with an uncanny ability to organize information. Interesting connection. You see how this could be a great resource to bring to certain tasks? Maybe you care really deeply about others being taken care of or achieving their potential. Does this go along with a sense of being able to empathically read their needs? You see how companies like Nordstrom's and Mary Kay used exactly that to achieve success. Maybe you're a competitive, goal-oriented, linear, people-oriented, busy person. Does this go along with a sense of impatience, drive, wanting to look good? You see how those traits work for people like Tony Robbins and Oprah Winfrey? Try one more. How about those of you who can always see how something won't work? You test, you challenge, you question everything. You see how problem solving or safety issues would benefit from your inherent skills and how you perceive the world around you? So being yourself And using your own inherent skills will always take you further than copying someone else's way. Plus, when you do succeed, you'll know it was really you who did it. So taking this deeper, you know that you don't have just one perspective. It actually changes depending on your mood, depending on circumstances. So let's face it, you don't see things the same when you're sitting on top of the world and when the world is crumbling down on you. Those two perspectives add way more resources and tools. So as I began the process of rebuilding myself, I knew I'd have to take these pieces of myself apart, look at each one of them separately. I needed to know what each part was capable of, how they might block me, and what resources they brought to the table. Because each perspective was a part of my team. I could look to any of them, any combination, or all of them to help me through whatever came my way. I discovered that the angry voice inside who said no way to a life in a wheelchair was coming from a part of me who is a ferocious protector, filled with force of will. And he had all kinds of tools to bring to the table. Normally, I'm much more concerned with other people's successes and happiness, even to the point of sacrificing myself. So this protector was very different. And there he was within me, ready to help. Another part of me was about doing the right thing the right way. So it kept me paying attention to my form during physical therapy and definitely on the right path without being distracted. It contributed all kinds of help around staying authentic and not compromising my ethics. Another part, this is an amazing team internally, another part was great with priorities, metrics, doing project manager thinking. So that's the job I assigned to him. When I was feeling confident and in control of myself, finally, another part of me showed up who I'd missed for some time, my inner creator. This is a part of me that is driven by aesthetics, beauty, and self-expression. So looking back, I'm saying, oh my gosh, I have a heck of a team behind me. I knew I could handle anything, including training my nerves to burn new pathways between my brain and my legs, and having the force of will to overcome any obstacle thrown my way. When all of these inner voices had been brought up from my subconscious to my conscious mind, I was able to use them to increase my abilities many times over. So learning about these voices within you is incredibly powerful. Some are useful, some get in your way. But when you know who they are and how to access them, you're in charge of you. It's like when you have a new appliance or a piece of equipment. Being able to download an operating manual or watch tutorials on how to use it makes you much more confident and comfortable. You know what the features are, you know how to use them. And you can be that confident and comfortable about yourself, knowing you have all these tools and resources and can handle whatever life throws at you. That's a serious amount of confidence. So imagine how you would feel being the most amazing version of yourself. Think about everything you've ever wanted but didn't feel you had the abilities or the know-how to get it. Now imagine you have those abilities, those tools, resources, and know-how. What would you do? What would you go for? Because you don't have to settle for crawling along a leaf. You can spread your wings like that butterfly and take flight. Remember when I said I was going to talk about my services a bit at the end? Well, helping you become that amazing version of yourself is my mission. There's a reason I named my company Optimize Results, because that's what you get from the process. Each perspective or worldview needs their own approach to achieving their own best results. There is no one size fits all. We may have similar problems, but how we solve them is connected to who we are. You need the key to your own treasure trove, the treasure trove within. And the ease and simplicity of how we actually affect change is really the magic. I've helped literally hundreds of people to take charge of and recreate intentional, values-based lives, unshaken by other people or circumstances. We face the same challenges as anyone would, but rather than being beaten into reaction and stress, we access the resources in our treasure troves and triumph. So if you're interested in how you can master the mountain of tools hiding within you, let's have a conversation. Just put your contact information in the chat and I'll get back to you within 24 hours. We can have a complimentary conversation. You can ask questions and we can explore how we might be a good fit. My contact information is in that Facebook event post. And when you're ready to take charge of your internal team, increasing your abilities by a quantum leap, I'm ready to take you there. Thanks again for spending this time with me.